Hello everyone, today we talk about Indo-European theology through compared linguistics and history of religion. This chapter is about the sacred flow of Aquae and the cosmic veil of Na. Right? We will explain what these terms mean, especially the latter. Some people have really never thought about it, but it's literally the root word. It's incredibly ancestral about our own no, which is essentially a metaphysical negation, and the same no negation, negatio in Latin, comes from na. Now, in the primordial dawn of Indo-European consciousness, when the cosmos was yet a tapestry woven of divine waters and celestial breaths, and I made an entire chapter about the latter, the sacred syllable na emerged as a resonant hymn to the eternal Aquae, in Latin, the cosmic waters revered as the womb of all existence. In the video about Agni, sacred fire, we've seen how the inception of life starts from the darkest of the abyss, right? It's the heavenly lightning that strikes at the deepest of darkness, that is the womb, the female essence par excellence. And it's exactly only from these depths that the greatest divine accomplishment can arise, because it's the liminal moment, that it's the lowest you can achieve. And so as being manifests there, right, even though it is becoming to be the absolute cosmic being, at the same time, it knows what's essentially the greatest price to pay. This is all connected with the waters, the chthonic element par excellence, even more than the tellus, right? We'll talk about this too. Hell is probably non-being, and it connects mostly to a dark abyss rather than an inferic, at least intended as a flaming reality that partially belongs to the netherworld, if anything, just in a titanic fashion, right? There is a force of the earth that is also becoming, and so on. If you're interested in the doctrine of the two natures, being and becoming, as you know, I made an entire video about that. And it's the metaphysical precondition for any of achievement. This connects also with the famous tale of the saved from the waters, right? Or he who at least is also essentially the bull of his own mother, and therefore contains his same mother even before being born in her. This is a much more universal tradition that it's often appreciated. I'm really tired to see people making Indo-Europeistics online and sticking just to archaeogenetics, thinking that, they don't have to study Indo-European theology because, or any other peoples for that matter, because, materialism has infested even those that should be, in theory, more inclined towards some spiritual dimension. Now, in the Proto-Indo-European lexicon, na derives from the root nehu. So that would be the no, right? Signifying what? Moisture or flow, right? So from one side, we'll see now it's an obscuring force, but it's also an ever-becoming force, so the opposite of the perennial state. As attested in the Hittite nahi, to pour, and the Avestan nang, to moisten, from texts that from both cultures provide early evidence of this root in ritual and linguistic contexts, grounding the syllable in primal act of liquid creation. These ancient peoples dwelling in a world where the heavens and earth were bound by the ceaseless flow of these primordial waters beheld in Na the essence of the dark, inscrutable oceans that cloaked the world in the embrace of night. They are, as we will learn now, the measure of one's own short-sightedness. All right. In Vedic texts, the Rig Veda 10:82-6, this, as you know, is a foundational Vedic hymn collection dating to roughly the mid to the end of the second millennium BC, describes the cosmic waters as Apa, the boundless deep from which Vishvakarman, the All-Maker, shaped the universe. While in Old Norse, the Gylfaginning part of here the prose Edda, as you know, from its writing in 13th century, and of course dating to recounting Norse cosmology from primordial times, recounts in fact the original void, Ginnungagap, filled with icy waters from Niflheim, birthing Ymir, the cosmic giant, as well. So you see always the chthonic and titanic association. So this water, by existing, has some value, but it's the lower one, the most liminal, the most evanescent, the one that does not make it, that sticks to the lowest, all right, and fundamentally can produce from its elements a biological dimension, as we would, crudely define from a scientific point of view, but not one much capable to elevate itself beyond to the perennial dimension. Now, to the sources, the night was no mere absence of light, but a sacred veil. Sacred understood as providential, in the sense that, as we've seen, it was by itself negative. It was woven from the tenebrous depths of the cosmic ocean, where the luminous tides of day retreated, yielding to the mysterious currents that encircled the earth. But the most glorious divine accomplishment could have not but started from the lowest, as we explained. When asked, and this is the actual etymology of our word no, in the stillness of those shadowed hours, in the night, what do you see? The answer was a solemn chant. I see only Na, the waters. In other words, Na meant I don't see, because there is a veil of waters, and that creates darkness per se, because actually the perennial dimension is so shiny that can't be but in the wicked eye, in the limited eye, the seeing eye, in fact, because, as you know, the concept of the sinner, as providentially speaking, he who is visos, who is wise, who sees, who has the power of video, just like in the eye of Ra, embraces everything, including this chthonic dimension, these waters, that, of course, as every element, is metaphysical to an extent. And it is the sort of the thickness that separates you from God. This was no mere observation, but a profound theological declaration, for to see now was to acknowledge the hidden, the unseen, the divine negation that shrouded all things in mystery for those who were not able to see them, rendering them thus invisible only to mortal eyes, and so a product of the same. Right? The reason why this is divine is because this mechanism is entailed by the absolute. And so by this law, so to say, that can be in fact surpassed only by he who dictates it, so God himself, when you sin, you're basically shutting your eyes. You do not want to, you don't want to achieve your full potential. In the Avestan Yasna 10.1, this is a liturgical text of Zoroastrianism. I recently made a video about the rise and fall of the Iranian civilization, the dating to the essentially to 1000 BC, let's say, to make things square. The waters, Appas, are invoked as Aurani. Divine beings who veil the world in sacred obscurity, paralleling the Hellenic Erebos, the primordial darkness born of chaos in Hellenic mythology, as described, in fact, in Hesiod's Theogony 123. This was an Hellenic epic poem dating to the 8th century BC. It's very sort of Pelagian in nature, but it still had impressed an important deal of this Dorian, and I have something more coming on that concept of the same. Some of you will say, but Aurani also sounds similar to Uranus. Do they have the same etymology? We're talking about the sky. No, but not in a phonetic sense, but in a conceptual one. There can be an approximation, because Aurani comes from the Proto-Indo-European huesos, which means Lord Divine Spirit, which is, as we've seen, connected with video and visot. So he's the guy who actually sees through this. However, Ani is also the feminine suffix denoting companionship. The wife, the mate, right? Similar to the Sanskrit Ani or Ini for feminine relational forms, right? So these heavenly deities of female character are the ones who bring the waters. So the etymology is not, the same in a strictly linguistical sense to Uranus, but Uranus comes from the Proto-European root huers, helps to moisten, to drip, to flow, evoking rain. And in this sense, it's connected actually to the Sanskrit Varsha, which is rain, and the Hittite Varsha, fog, mist. So actually, this is very much connected, but it's not conceptually, but it's not at least in a strict connection. At least there is a branch divergence. There is a thematic overlap, but not etymological. So by checking something that is a false friend, you actually discover that the original meaning actually doubles down on the same concept. It's more the difference between the agent and the object in this action. Thus, Na, the sacred sound of water, became the Indo-European voice of negation. The utterance of no and non. We can say the holy utterance, because again, this was part of sacred text as well, and language as such was meant to be loaded, in any case, with a sacred value. Otherwise, it could have not been even spoken. It was a testament to the unseen potency of the divine waters that both concealed and birthed the cosmos. There's always a dual aspect. It's like the dragon. Yes, he's an antagonist, but without that, remember, you cannot break free from the same veil of darkness. You have to go through that. And so you owe to that, essentially, your way back, intended properly as a struggle, right, of this chthonic, full and mortal dimension. It's like, for this reason that, again, Romulus and Remus are saved from the waters. That's why, the Merovingian dynasty stemmed from a sea monster of some sort, because it's something that emerged from the darkest of the abysses, promisingly springing back to the highest. This sacred negation, born from the nocturnal waters, found echo in the mists that rose from the earth herself, veils of vapor called naba, a term that sings of waters that appear as ethereal shrouds. The term naba is rooted in the Proto-Indo-European nebu, meaning cloud or mist, seen in Sanskrit nabas, sky, mist. Also, and here we can add all examples from many Indo-European languages, soon as it is documented in various branches, the Old Church Slavonic nebo, heaven, so again, later, but stemming from the same root when the Slavs became literate, and Hittite naifish, which means sky, right, and specifically, as we'll see now, also the starry one. These terms reflect a shared Indo-European linguistic heritage linking atmospheric phenomena to the divine. Right? After all, think about it. When does lightning manifest? In full, sun, in good weather? No. Lightning strikes the earth and ingravitates it during a major thunderstorm, because God dominates on these darkest forces by definition. He's the only one who can master them in absolute terms. In fact, again, it's only through those you can get to him. Think about Jupiter Pluvius, right? It was probably an attribute of not just Jupiter tonans, so throwing literal bolts, but literally sending the rain as well. And so there is a connection, by the way, linking the terrestrial fog to the celestial vault as well. In the fog as in the night, the query, what do you see, elicited the same reverent response. I see the waters. a confession of divine obscurity that cloaked perception. It was, in other words, an admission of your own sin, as much as fear. After all, what kind of question was this? The one in the night, right? During certain rituals that were actually carried out, still carried out today at night in the peak of probably the breakthrough. Think about Christmas or Easter, the night mass. Why do you think that is the case? It's just merely, I don't know, it's a clock thing. It stems from the same pre-Christian Catholic tradition. Let's say when you look at the mists born of the evaporation of sacred waters, for example, these were not mere phenomena, but manifestations of the divine. Also because water at that point was just like at dawn, like literally energized. Water evaporates because there is some energy that has stemmed from, in fact, the rising sun. Their name Naba linking them to the celestial firmament, in fact, the Naka, where, however, as we'll see now, is the starry night, where the dark ocean now united with the luminous light Ka of the One, Eka, the primal radiance that emerged from the cosmic deep, is a syncresis with the divine. It's the idea that you see the sky, we will make, the root phoneme K, the heart, just like the one giving birth to cosmos, to sky, and so on, is here combined with the negation, right? So there is here the reference to an actual light, which is the one of the stars in the darkness, though. During the night, meaning during that moment in which the earth is shrouded by these darkness. And it's at that moment that the sacred manifests itself in at its most glorious moment, because, like the Proverbs says, it's never as dark as before dawn. And so it's this eve, this vigil, that is probably the inception of divine manifestation. This is reflected at so many different levels. Think about the angel that announces to the shepherds the arrival, God first, the comet. This is all the birth at night, in the darkest of the manger. It's all from the same identical root, right? In the Rig Veda 10:129-3, this again is a hymn on cosmic origins. Naka is the celestial dome where the waters and light converge. Mirrored in the old Persian Naka, heaven, and the Germanic Nacht, night, reflecting shared Indo-European concepts of the starry sky, of the firmament. Where, remember, the stars are not merely some celestial bodies or even some abstract manifestation of God from above. Is also where the souls arrive of the heroes who manage to transfigure across the darkness, exactly because you can't see the star itself. The starry sky thus reflects the luminous waters, and it's the proof of light itself, denying the non-negation. This union of dark and light waters in the starry vault was a sacred mystery, a celestial dance of creation, where the Aquae, both inscrutable and radiant, wove the fabric of the heavens, their eternal motion, Ak, which, again, is deeply connected with the root word for cosmos, a testament to the divine order that governed, in fact, the universe, Kata Olon. The root Ak, meaning to move swiftly, connected also with properly the rise of the sun, of the word chariot, as we've seen also in the root word H. We made a video about properly informing, like a divine breath, the word appears in the Sanskrit ashu, which stands for quick, and the Latin acus, meaning needle, which means acute, by the way. Linguistic roots preserved also, of course, in ancient texts, symbolizing the dynamic flow of the cosmic waters as seen in the Avestan akshina, flowing, because it combines, as you understand here, both the root word for the sort of heroic movement, but in a Udor fashion, as we've seen before, in a rainy way, in a flowing way, from Zoroastrian hymns. Across the vast Indo-European world, from the Vedic hymns to the windswept plains of the Germanic tribes and the forested realms of the Slavs, the sacred waters were the source of all vitality. Their breath and the animating force that pulls through creation. All right, that's also what pumps blood. Right, there is, of course, a somatic, water dimension in that too. So it's always double-edged, literally, to some extent. You can't, again, achieve divine transfiguration without having summoned the darkest forces. The root an, meaning to breathe, we've seen it, again, in a recent video, was a divine gift, a sacred exhalation of the cosmic waters, that in this sense were some sort of, water breath that infused life into the world. In Proto-Indo-European anu, to breathe, is attested in Sanskrit aniti. He breathes the Hellenic animos, wind, and Old Irish anal, breathe, evidence in early Indo-European languages underscoring the universal life force tied to the waters. In Sanskrit, tan stretched forth as the extension of divine will, spreading life as the waters spread across the earth, while in Latin tendo echoed this act of stretching, a divine unfolding of creation. The root ten, meaning to stretch, is found in Avestan tanam, to extend, and Old Norse thenia, to stretch. Different ancient sources reflecting the water's expansive reach. The breath of the waters birthed thought, man, the mind, mens, that perceived the divine order, and love, van, embodied in Venus, the goddess whose name resounds with the water's creative desire. You all know in mythology the birth of Venus. I will likely use her in the thumbnail as well. Venus derives herself from the Proto-Indo-European venu, to desire, seen in Sanskrit vanati, he loves, and Old High German vunna, joy. The last aspect is fascinating because if you know the Germanic dioscuri, Vinil and Vandil, Vinnan is connected to the Longbirds, right? And Vandil with the Vandals, of course. And this was the previous name of the Longbirds before they reached Central Europe and got into some more militaristic, Odinistic identity. In fact, the story is that the Longbirds were connected with female figures originally. That Scandinavia, where they originated according to the myth, is also very well documented, was in this sense this idea of joy as a physical pleasure, as some van and sort of connected idea of the world and divinity. So entering into this manhood in that meat grinder that continental Europe was at the time, probably also is the original idea behind the legend, right? As the sort of more zip-oriented Scandinavia was less militarized than the Odinic Germania, right? And actually, things overlapped. It's not like, Scandinavia was particularly peaceful. They didn't actually have Odinism. That's another story for another video. But archetypally, that's what the Longbirds in their ethnogenesis remember themselves like, the bird from this watery world, stepping into something greater, which is identifying with Odin himself through the beard. So you see, it's because in some Longbird studies you find Vinnan connected properly with Win, which actually is etymologically the case, but eventually the meaning branched into a different form, so that this joy, when it is something different. You'll see it better, if anything, in another video. But it's definitely interesting to look at this Indo-European linguistic traditions, because you realize that there is nothing that is really left to the case, or there's really a coincidence. It's all interwoven with itself. Today on X sent me a video to criticize about a guy, I think it was criticizing the entire sense of even the existence of an Indo-European religion. I even watched that video. I actually read the script because I didn't have time. And with those people, you can't reason, because it's not like they're even making bad points, but they just don't understand the depth of what they're saying. Like, they're living in this liminal space of skepticism, and they don't understand because they don't have any experience with compared Indo-Europeistics in any deeper sense than reading somebody else's work also, and not just getting into the actual sources, into actual linguistics, into actual hard work, and always needing, to cite someone even when they go to the bathroom, and then not knowing anything because they spent the entirety of their time mostly searching for this stuff or making polished videos without studying a freaking thing for it. So the best answer to that content is, we don't care. We're keeping to make these videos, and if somebody ever complains, it doesn't matter, because it would actually bring even more visibility, and this thing is going to steamroll anyone and anything, right? Sanctity. There is some sense, again, of this primordial mist, the morning, the rising star, Venus. It's all about also Eros, sexuality, and this deeply chthonic dimension. We've seen this also recently in the video about the sleeping mountains, the tradition of slumbering monarchs, because in the highest sense there is, in fact, in the mountain, the Lord, and the female deities, the Rusalkas of the Slavic tradition, they're very much more connected to the waters, notoriously, like the nymphs and so on. They're exactly the same thing. But there is also probably an underworld. In theory, there is also an association with the pre-Indo-European civilization of the mother that also had her own palace and citadel in that sense, but also this would have been now brought to the netherworld in a metaphysical sense in the Indo-European times, ideally. Then, of course, all these concept would be constantly readapted to the circumstance, but the root words are impossible to ignore, and also the general meaning connected with them. That's the match, right? Sanctity itself, in fact, the root word "esan" was a gift of the waters, right? It's the same concept of the baptism, as saved from the waters, because that's literally what the rite is. And again, it's just what we have seen in the European tradition, historically, in all mythology and beyond. This is universal. We're talking here in the Europeistics because it's easier to stick all to the just within a specific branch and of the sort of world languages, and there is some sort of better documented at some point route to this. It's easier just by linguistical affinity to study. But of course, sanctity, sanctitas, stems from a distribution of divine grace, naturally officiated by somebody, like, again, the priesthood that baptizes, right? And or also as the paterfamilias would have done. While the soul, the Atman, you see it also in animus, right, in Latin, was the vital breath drawn from the cosmic ocean. So in anima, there is literally this connection with the properly salvation from the waters of the individual as the sole metaphysical precondition for actual salvation, right? That obviously was a path of initiation in case of things like baptism and other rites, but had to arrive straight to divinity. And this was, in any case, mediated by divinity. And this is why the sacraments, in that sense, are so important in a theological sense. Uniting the individual with the universal Atman, the eternal self that is one with the Brahman, the divine essence permeating all, just to stick to, of course, the Vedic tradition. In the Chandogya Upanishad 687, this is a key Vedic philosophical text dating to, again, the dating is not so important as to when it was, where it descended from and when it descended from, let's say the 8th, the 7th century BC for written tradition. Atman is described as the essence born of the waters. themselves. This is mirrored in the Celtic, same root, for example, of anima in Latin, soul derived from anu, as we've seen this shared root across Indo-European languages. I always say that, by the way, Gallic and Italic were basically the same language, connecting the soul to the cosmic breath. In the Vedic tradition, the prana, the five-fold breath of the cosmic waters, was a sacred dance of life within the human form. Each breath a divine current, prana the forward breath through nose and mouth, apana descending to the heart, samana circulating the core, udana rising upward in exhalation, and vyana diffusing life throughout the body. The Taittiriya Upanishad 2.1, a Vedic text on spiritual physiology, roughly the 6th century BC, details these five breaths as manifestations of the cosmic prana, paralleled in the Avestan Vata with breath which animates creation in the Yasna 19.9, the Zoroastrian liturgical text, so across the Indo-Iranian tradition. These were not mere physiological acts, but sacred movements mirroring the cosmic flow of the waters, whose divine daughters, the apodevir, in fact the Aquae, were the generatricas of all creation, mobile and immobile, as sung in the Rigveda 10.9.1, a hymn praising the divine waters. The Rigveda 10.9.1 invokes the apodevir as the mothers of the cosmos, because they are literally the womb that generates. So they are not the ones who actually create this, because the actual act of creation is through the ingravidation from the side of God Father, right? But they still birthing the cosmos. Also in its negative dimension, it's fallen type, like this all being created by the cracking of celestial vault, the fall, etc. So this happens to be, in a way, the mother of also he who will save his own mother, according to also the most straightforward Catholic theology, as he will evolve, like from the lower dimensions, like Mithras, that becomes, like, is literally born as a stone, and becomes the sun himself. And so he literally passes through the spectrum that is the cosmos at the end of the day, and up until, the absolute perfection, something at least transcendental. This is paralleled, by the way, in the Hellenic mythology by the Oceanids, that are the daughters of Oceanus, as noted in Hesiod's Theogony, 337 and 370, something like that. This describing Hellenic primordial deities. Again, he's a bit Pelagianly biased, but there is definitely always a combination of the Uranian and the Telluric, the heavenly and the earthly. These female deities' knowledge was vast, because they knew the very essence of nature, and therefore also the secrets necessary to reactivate it in the right way, including through probably the mystery of Eros and ingravidation, conception. Their happiness was perfect, at least in this pure ecstatic sense, as we've seen before with Vinnan, with joy. It's more like a pleasure-based satisfaction. It's the concept of Venus, right? As we've seen with literally Frau Venus in the Tannhäuser, and that we will come back discussing, because it literally as recent also in European folklore as that. Why were these deities so wise? Because they knew, of course, the origin of heaven and earth. They had comparticipated to its rebirth. Their eternal motion through the universe, that is through the root phoneme J, so to say, as a source of divine wisdom. We will see this better in another video, Jna, from which sprang the Hellenic noeo, that is, to understand, literally to know, like cognosco in Latin, gnosis too, like nous, of course, not in the Gnostic sense, which is a heresy, and that had nothing to do, in fact, with this specific, at least with the Uranian, in the divine Indo-European dimension. But surely gnosis had a lot to do with this sort of entrapment, intellectual entrapment, a bit like the idea that, of the fallen alchemic notion that gold is the actual material and not something more spiritually meant, right? And nous is mind as well, right? So the serpents, right, the tree of knowledge, why is it really that, right? We'll explain it in our videos, because it's actually the false promise of endless pleasure through the knowledge of the mechanisms of this world that is, however, fallen, and therefore cannot restore what only the transcendental, the perennial, the divine can. Right? This is a way to explain that, as a matter of fact. And I would like to stress, like, these are so sort of still oddly widespread, familiar concepts, right? Theologically, religiously speaking, and we have literally, from our own very language, the actual etymological explanation of the entire metaphysics lay under them, and nobody knows anything about this stuff, right? This is the thing that really drives me nuts, because it's impossible to study Indo-Europeistics without this stuff, all right? If you don't know this stuff, you know none of that, none of all the rest. This is not theories, strange field of scholar. If you do not know these meanings, you're done for with anything, because this is not just, I don't know, Indo-Europeistics as some sort of what people think an esoteric. No, this is literally the basics of our entire knowledge, our entire civilization, our entire relation with the universe. If you don't understand that, if you don't understand the very words of the language you speak, you cannot understand anything about yourself, right? There are other connections here with the root. For example, the anoia, that is thought. Well, this is all rooted, again, in the sacred flow of Na, the waters that carry the light of divine consciousness. They're at least obscured it, but contained them, but through their flow, still the mystery of the same. And that's why they were so attractive and so dangerous, because if you sort of, through them, diverted yourself into this pleasure, very much like Narcissus, you could fall into the waters and die and drown, even if you had all the means and you had all the possession of the same nature. In other words, if you fall into this Gnostic heresy, you will self-destroy. The root gnehu, to know, so from the root of gnosis, of knowledge itself, links Sanskrit jna to Hellenic gnosis, knowledge, and Old Church Slavonic, for example, znati, to know. A Proto-Indo-European root preserved evidently across the millennia in ancient languages, tying wisdom to the water's flow. Right? There was a Taoist text literally saying that they were it's in the video about the Holy Fathers, right? Probably the traditional meaning of the patriarchate. I don't remember which one of them, was made many, but they were themselves imprescrutable as waters. Why? Because they had actually achieved, these were the holy race of the without kings, or so they had already gone beyond, right? And so it's not like they were imprescrutable as the waters because they were like that. There is a parallelism, metaphorically speaking, but remember, the waters are only the veil of the fallen, of the mortal, of the sinful, right? So these guys had gone beyond, and thus they were imprescrutable as the waters. The divine feminine, Vach, the word, daughter of the waters, was the sacred voice through which the Aquae named the gods, birthing them, essentially baptizing them. Her name echoing in Latin vox, and her role as mother of the Vedas, a testament to her divinity. It's important also etymologically to stress that the root word is different, because vox is literally the root word in Proto-Indo-European stands for sound, whereas Veda, Vedas, the visits and so on, are sent from to see, right? So they were doing here, the mother and the son, two different things. It's just like, I don't know, in the Arthurian legions, in all the idea of this matter, overprotected matter that withholds his son from fully maturing, right? And then he springs out, and she actually dies in her telluric dimension, but the hero will eventually save the entire universe in a deeper eschatological sense. In the Rig Veda 125, this is a hymn celebrating Vak as divine speech. The latter is described as the queen of the gods, born from the waters, with parallels in the Old Irish Baik, which means speech, and the Germanic vod, voice, from the PIE voku, a root linking speech across Indo-European languages. The very concept of name, naman, meaning the thought of the waters, because thought is man and water is na, revealed the sacred origin of language, born in the communion of humanity with the divine waters under the celestial vault. Why is this important? Because your name is given to you. You're passive to that, and it speaks of your somatic ancestry. It's the telluric dimension more than its highly spiritual one. They're actually connected, but in that sense, it's as if you were impressed a mark at birth. That is, of course, the mark of the fallen through all the, the combination of sins of the ancestors and all this stuff. But in this sense, tracing a very specific pathway for your salvation, because the end point is the same, the direction is the same, but the path you have fallen up to as a being is different for everybody. And so the name, as something that is attributed to you, literally stems from this negation, right, that it is entailed as you're not the absolute, you're not the only one, you're a different person, and you're, in this sense, limited by your own name. You're characterized by your own name. This is incredibly fascinating and interesting if you think about that. And it has to become the same source of your own salvation. It's always double-edged. If you understand the meaning of your own nature, of your own character, you will know what path awaits you, because you will be actually creating it yourself, providentially speaking. The root nehum, which stands, in fact, for name, appears in the Hittite laman, which means name, the Old Persian nama, name, even in ancient inscriptions, signifying the water's role in bestowing identity. Hence the baptism as that as well. You're conferred your name, your baptistic name. Just think about how, literally, like, it's a thing, and how many people actually know this, and the connection with the meaning of the waters in metaphysics. No, right? It's more like, no, because you're washed from the saints. Ideally, yes, but you've just heard it repeating with somebody else, but you have no idea of the metaphysics behind that, or why, or the fact that this is also kind of some dark point where you're safe from the waters rather than being properly just impressed by the waters. And so it's something always double in meaning, a wonderful, but a positively wonderful, but also a terrible one to an extent. This naming was no mere act of designation, but a sacred rite, in fact, a participation in the divine act of creation. Hence, the sacrum, as we explained before, it also stems from this, where the waters, through Vak, bestowed identity upon all beings, linking them to the eternal. And this bond was unbreakable, unless you properly dissolved yourself, the self-destroyed. As we just explained, the waters held a dual nature, both life-giving and concealing. Their dark aspect embodied in Na, as the negation of visibility in the impenetrable ocean that surrounded the earth at night, Nak. In other words, you were essentially given by God the form of this limitation. Right, so you were not merely substance. Your life, as we've seen, was infused through this sacrament, and through the waters that God had prepared for you, you had to navigate in the course of your life to break through the clouds and witness to the sun. In Sanskrit, Nakta sang of the night's circular motion, acta, while in the Hellenic nux and Latin nox echoed this sacred darkness, the cosmic ocean's embrace where the soul returned at death, neck, plunging into the tenebrous waters of the beyond, as depicted in the Hellenic image of the soul's dive into the cosmic ocean, a return to its aqueous origin, or at least, as we explained in the video about the afterlife, and as you see also from the New Testament, after death, everybody falls into hell once again. And at that point, there is a major test to the second soul, not the one that just dissolved in the persona, death, nor the somatic essence that will come back to the totem of the ancestors. Actually, you fall there. The second soul falls there too, and at that point, it's judged. Right? If it manages to escape that, it can't go to heaven. That's called the triumph over the second death. It's also known as the Mors Triumphalis, and of course, this is impressed by the degree you had lived in that moment. Of course, this is a bit theologically complex to explain. You can go watch those videos I made about the traditional doctrine of afterlife. But you can appreciate how, indeed, there was always an incredibly terrifying test after death. And if anything, just the victorious soul, the one of the hero that was perfectly well aware of his accomplishment in a providential sense, was to go straight to the firmament, right? And so at that point, he had surpassed the waters. He could dominate them as well. It's just like passing across the clouds and literally seeing the sky. It's just like I would go on a plane. It's the same concept, right? The root neku, night, is found in Avestan naksh, night, and Old Lithuanian nakti, night, while nek, death, appears in Sanskrit nasyati, he perishes, and Hellenic nekros, corpse, roots preserved in ancient texts. From this dark ocean sprang nectar, the divine drink that granted immortality by traversing the waters of death, right? A sacred libation that united the gods with the eternal. And this was in itself a test. In this sense, the nectar wasn't much the great sort of sweet, as you could imagine. It was in a intoxicating, inebriating fashion that only the superior could surpass. It was a test by the god. If you drink this, if you're basically a bad soul, it's venom, you will die. You will not pass it, right? If you pass through those waters, through this nectar, you survive to that, your soul was not polluted by it, you could literally achieve immortality. That's exactly the concept of nectar, which is deeply connected, in fact, to this sort of fluid, this water, but to death itself, as the new negation entailed. In the Homeric Hellenic Iliad, 1938, where, as you know, roughly in the 8th century BC, this epic poem was written down in the way we know, nectar is the drink of the gods, linked to Sanskrit amrita, immortal, from the Proto-Indo-European umrtos, that is literally the denial of mortality, not mortal, right? This is incredibly beautiful, if you think about it, because it's literally the non-dead, right? He who had surpassed death itself. It has nothing to do actually with, today's non-dead, the non-mortus. In the Draculian thing, those were tyrants that sort of failed to divinity, but were still alive in the sense partly after death, and their soul and more would keep roaming the earth for how powerful they were in that case of, of course, in vampirology, that's another story. We can make at some point videos about that. But it derived from a shared mythological concept, of course, of victory over death. That's what you had to accomplish, right? You had to dominate the waters. The waters movement was not only cosmic, but earthly, obviously enough. The tortuous flow, we talked about the root phoneme ag, which is the same one of Agni, of Ignis, that is, in fact, the one of sacred fire, that is the same thunderbolt, that strikes as a lightning in the depths of the abyss of the waters to properly gravitate this great maternal womb. And the interesting aspect about this is the tortuosity of this is almost geometric, because just like a thunder, the divine enters the crevices of this fractal world, and at the same time, this tortuous flow is exactly, let's say, the same. In fact, complementarily matching the one of the waters. And in this, it gave rise, by the way, from a merely chthonic dimension, if not minimally from the divine side, to negative powers like the serpent spirits, the nag, the naga, the nagi of Sanskrit, the nymph of the Hellenic, the natrix of Latin, divine beings who dwelt in the sacred springs and rivers as chthonic forces, their sinuous motion and sensual motion as a reflection of the water's eternal dance. And again, ensnaring the weak-minded and attracting them into the oblivion of the darkness. The root snag, to crawl, underlies Sanskrit naga, serpent, the Hellenic nymph as probably water spirit, and the Latin natrix as water snake, which is connected with swimming as well. You can see this also in the Vedic Naga hymns, the Rig Veda 753. Is it literally hymns to serpent deities, right? So there is something really disturbing about it all, right? We have sort of embellished the concept of the nymphs, of this sensuality, but it's actually pernicious. It's witchcrafty, so to say. As chthonic as it gets, the human body itself was understood in the European theology as a microcosm of these waters, with the nasa, the nostrils, casting, and literally stemming from na, casting forth asa, the breath of life, right? And nephros, the kidneys, purifying the inner waters, transforming them into the sacred flow of existence. Sanskrit nasa derives from neus, which is literally also the root word of nose. So nose has to do with know, right? Sin, for example, also in random linguistic references, Old Norse nos, nostril, while nephros comes from negurus, found in Avestan Nairika, kidney, terms from probably ancient medical and ritual texts as well, as we've seen deeply entwined one another. Even the act of naming a child, Naaman, was a divine act, as we explained, a recognition of the thought, the man born from the waters, Na, while the Nasatia, the celestial Asvina, rode the heavens as twin horsemen, embodying the union of the dark and luminous waters at dawn, interestingly enough, a sacred moment of cosmic harmony. This was in some ways also the myth of the Dioscuri, right? One eventually is already immortal, at least is providentially destined to that and makes it into heaven, the other actually dies. And this is probably an entwined duo, because they are, in a sense, the reflection of the same human potential, right, in the same. And this manifests in these seminal phases of the astronomic cycle, where you have a balance between the darkness and the light, right, which is also the moment, for example, of spring, the spring equinox, where everything is launched, the nova aetas, right? So this is as sort of comprehensive as it gets. The Ashvina are invoked in Rig Veda 131, a hymn to the divine twins, as divine twins born of the waters, both of them. Remember that, it's not like they had a different origin, they had a different destiny, or at least one that one would be able to create, or is only the other to succumb to. Obviously paralleled by the Hellenic Dioscoroi, sons of Zeus linked to the dawn in Homeric hymns. Unsurprisingly, as we were just saying, This is in the Hellenic hymns of the 7th century BC. This seen probably the moment in which the, say, zero, like vanilla condition, when everyone had to restart and show like this, what this new life was capable of doing was equal. There was no difference between the two. And then one would survive, the others wouldn't make it. The water's stillness, gave rise to the now. The ship, famously enough, etymologically speaking, that rested upon the waves, and the nava, the vessel that moved through the waters, of course, its name linked to the newness, nava, novus, in fact, in Latin, of life born from the aqueous womb, right? Probably the concept of novelty we have just said, that the nova aetas, paradoxically begins with a denial, with a negation, right? Because at the darkest of it all, there, it's all rebooted, and as a broader test of life, it's something merely benign. There's always a contrast between the two things. There is a rising phase and a descending phase, and this, of course, represents also human life, in as much as it's not able to simply take off, right, and not to fall again. Hence, sort of entering at that point in a cyclical dimension is typical of the chthonic substrata. And it's that the Indo-European world was replete, of course, with a sense of cyclicity, but merely, in fact, in the lower kind, whereas there was definitely a linear concept of sort of providential direction and, in fact, divine action that was meant properly even to go from point A and point B. The root neo, boat, appears in Sanskrit now, which means ship, hence the Hellenic naus, the Old Irish noi, terms from maritime vocabularies, and it's not like here there was necessarily a particular link between India or, say, the British archipelago. The nuraghe, ancient stone structures of Sardinia, were understood as collectors of waters, hence nuraghe stemming literally from nu, because they were big wells. They were very chtonically understood. These were sacred sites where the divine flow as such was honored, at least. The Sardinian nuraghe might tied to water sanctuaries. This is at least a speculative etymology based on Sardinian archaeology. It's not to be given for granted. There is, however, a very important connection here with the Latin numen as well, which stands, as you know, for a very particular conceptualization of the manifestation of divine power in the Roman archaic religion. I made a video about the numina in the series about sacred royalty. If anything, we'll come back to that as well. And this, the root nu here stands in the fact that not just the numen was a manifestation of the higher divine power, and thus, as we've seen also from Taoism and in other references, it was imperscrutable, at least to the sort of mortals. But it was, in this sense, absconditus as well. I mean, it was properly occulted, in as much as, you know, people could not formally understand it or manifesting in a way that wasn't, in fact, transcendental, right? So that would be the actual etymology of numen, which, as you know, is, in fact, a numinous force. It's something that is portentously wonderful and can be properly activated by he who knows how to handle that, and the same ruler can manifest as a numen. It's as if literally like there was someone who looks like a man but is actually really a god, right? You know, a great deity in human form, as it was called. The human soul too was born from the waters, Nri, Nara, and the man who arrives, Ri/R, from the cosmic ocean. His dance, Nrit, is a sacred rhythm echoing the waters, the eternal motion. Sanskrit Nri comes from Ner, which means men, seen in Avesta Nar, in Hellenic Aner, while Nrit derives from to dance, in Sanskrit, found in Old Norse Narta, to move rhythmically. This has definitely roots in ritual and poetic texts you can find. To wash Nish was to purify in the sacred current, of course. To guide Ni was to follow the river's course, and to bind Na was to connect with the eternal, as in the nexus of Latin, or the nassa that captured the sacred fish of the waters. The root nehu, to bind, appears in Sanskrit. Naha, as we just said, bond, Latin nexus, connection, and Old High German nava, net, terms for legal and ritual context. Why? Because the na constrained you, right? So you were enveloped by this water, right, to the degree you were properly captured by that, like in the net, right? Following tortuous path, but the one that was right to just keep you, to clothe you, so to say. So you understand how variedly verifiable, by the way, all this etymology actually is. In the European theology, the waters are thus the divine matrix, the source of negation and creation at the same time, darkness and light, at least the light brought by God, and shining through the same screen, life and death as well. It's always double-edged. It could have not been the same. The darkest abyss in the ocean is also the place you have to reach in order to find the greatest light. At that point, transfiguring everything, transcending everything. From the na of the unseen night to the na of the luminous firmament, at least luminous because of the stars in an otherwise dark night, from the breath of an an to the wisdom of Jinnah, the Aquae, the sacred waters, were the eternal flow that bound humanity to the divine. Their sacred currents singing through every act, every name, every breath, a ceaseless hymn to the cosmic order that is both the origin and destiny of all. I think that, let's say, in general, we nailed at least the major meanings, because, of course, you can trace others, but these are at least the better known. And you can appreciate how compenetrative this thing is, metaphysically, beyond the higher nature, right, in the lower one, as a matter of fact. No accomplishment can be obtained without passing through these waters of obscurity. This screen that prevents you from seeing. It's just going through that. It's just winning the fear of the darkness that exists only because of fear itself. That's the point. That divinity can be attained and mortality can be defeated. In the Mors Triumphalis, in the victory over the second death, and therefore earning a place in the very firmament, shining, right, also for those who are on earth. Witnessing, too, the fact that these two dimensions are always connected. There is no sort of hypostatic separation. There is always a mean to that. And it couldn't be otherwise. There wouldn't be the two natures of being and becoming otherwise. All right. So it's a being, but also becoming from what? Right, and what also. So this is, I think, very important. I'm really glad that we managed to cover this. These videos about Indo-European theology are particularly successful. I also created literally a theology series. We have slowed down a little bit with the cycle. We have actually resumed recently. We are at this point enough to make some powerful videos because it's a very prosperous moment in terms of traffic and so on, so that there were issues with YouTube in September. I don't know whether they fixed them. At least I began to take off once again, and much better than in previous years. So I count on continuously pounding the algorithm with these specials. However, in between at this point, since the views are so high, we have to contemporate with also more cyclical stuff. At some point can be literally booming itself, but I was just pointing it out because in this way we make less Christian history, so it seems that I'm all about just this specific Indo-Europeistic aspect, because people, and I am into history of religion as a whole, and of course I think I wouldn't talk about Christianity if I didn't talk about Indo-European theology and vice versa, and also many other religions in the same way, right? Sometimes topics can penetrate, like the other day last week at this point, for the Sleeping Mountains. I was saying before, tomorrow there is a surprise. In fact, it's medieval Christian history, but it's really beautiful, and I'm planning other stuff. The amount of videos we're making is definitely welcome in the again, also in the European fashion. Here I realized that I have to hear just playlist issues that are not issues really. In any case, we made plenty of content on an incredibly large amount of stuff so far. The thing with the Indo-European content, it seems to me that you are somehow obsessed with this stuff. And whenever you make videos like this, and it's okay to sort of appreciate, but it's not okay in the sense of simply presuming that you should watch, first of all, only this stuff and not the other. Because you're not really going to be an accomplished person if you do, right? The memo here to be extrapolated from all this wisdom is that if you don't know the world, and you think only a shortcut can help you, you fall into agnostic heresy. So there is actually a greater risk for the majority of people who watch this Indo-European videos, given their personal background, we all know what humanity is about, that they're actually going to have problems. Maybe they're going to crash with the waters and passing through, hopefully. But the impression is that there is also a force that tends to discredit this. Like there is a force that aims at presuming that this can be just treasured as something of somebody or whatever. This skepticism about everything, or fixating on any particularly narrow point. That's why I'm mixing the two aspects of the story. That's the danger, right? This type of content you can't quite make if you don't take into consideration the whole, if you don't accept. This is not even just narrowly Indo-European, this is traditional in a universal sense. The Indo-Europeans arguably championing this, which is also what I believe. This is where you can start having a kind of debate on that, provided that people do not come from angles that really have nothing to do with the discipline. Expounding tradition is something very different from pretending to have found the, let's say, the capacity of harnessing that. Because this stuff is supposed to be enacted, right? So there are certain let's say, conditions that by themselves, certain approaches that are so entrenched into the misery of today's world, and it becomes so partisan, it becomes so earthly, and in fact connected with this divine negation that have nothing to do with Indo-European tradition. I discovered this incredibly gradually, as you know, so I was always somehow aware of it, but at the same time, I let's say, had to study a lot of other things as opposed to just Indo-Europeistics that allowed me to get there. So when I see, and I'm glad, of course, of the fact that people like the stuff, because in part it's controversial. Many of the clicks are, again, not just from detractors, but from people that are unaware of how this mechanism works, and that, maybe are also legitimately skeptical because they literally have not been provided with a background. But the problem is there. That's where the point really can turn. One thing is, unfortunately, not knowing, right? And that's something we can all share to some degree. And the more you know, the more you know how much you don't know, or at least the more you realize. I don't like the Socratic version of the story. Like, the more you know, the more you actually know, right? But you also get the measure of how vastly complex things are. And so it seems that our civilization has lost, say the world today entirely has lost the realization that at that point, you don't have to be, scared of how much you don't know. You have rather to say, I'm going to go ahead anyway with what I know, because I know that that's the way to conquer the unknown. The dark water of the night that wants to snare you instead. And many people are getting ensnared because they're weak, right? And they are exhausted, they are sinning, right? Thinking that victory cannot be achieved. This is the only way to achieve it. If you start fearing, because that's fundamentally what it is, it's not just not believing, right? You have to have faith, of course, in order to get through. It's like a golden path through the night that you have, however, to illuminate by stepping into the dark, taking a leap of faith into the dark, into the abyss, right? If you don't do that, you can't go anywhere. So to a degree, who cares about all the rest, right? This is my philosophy behind these videos, that I know that at some point this stuff is also going to probably attract not the wrong kind of attention, because again, I think that the more the stuff is put on the fore, the more people can understand. But of course, I'm going to be under a serious battering at some point, and I'm looking forward to that, right? Doesn't mean that I care, in fact, more than much. It's just something that I've never done, right? When you start getting, millions of views, you don't feel I feel excited about getting sort of that kind of pressure as far as, having to handle reactions is concerned, but it's also really worth it. And I don't see this as any kind of, but a honor, as a matter of fact. And the more of a struggle it is, the more of an honor it is, right? So, I've never really, there are some of you who are writing me privately, were asking me, but what do all these things mean, right? Q&As could be replete with that stuff, and sometimes these questions are very articulated, and they are observing. Like, you understand that these people listen to you, they have a curiosity. Here I could just read you something that arrived to me today, but maybe I will just leave it for the next Q&A. The problem is, as I've just hinted at, that again, if you don't make all the work, there's no shortcut, right? It's not like the little word that you can learn by heart and then you can keep it in your pocket and you don't have to do anything about that. That's nonsense, all right? That's Gnosticism. That's being killed by the darkness immediately on the spot, right? This thing is about making a freaking research about the whole story, right? And not stopping along the way at every step, just wondering about it, right? Either you do it or you don't, right? So I can assist you in this. Again, I've always considered myself primarily as an expounder of tradition, as far as I rightly conceptualize this all. It's not like that I don't understand what kind of personal responsibility I have in this, but it's all one, as well as equal for you, where you can't, or equal, like we all start from different positions, as we explain in the same video, but let's say it's the relation to the absolute, and so to the point of arrival is exactly the same in a liminal sense. And so if you're willing to do that, I'm going to be here and I'm going to continue this on the channel, with the channel, etc. You practically remember this, that I'm running this from several years and nobody literally knows who I am. At least very few people do. The adepts, no not quite. There are people that I esteem, etc. But it was also relatively accidental. But people, even people I know, even to a daily dimension, do not know about this as much as you at large do not know about this. All right. And this is something which I intend, in fact, to manifest in this fashion. You do not know who or what is behind this. All right. You don't know who's speaking. You may wanna be careful. We will surely continue this. For today, I stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. As always, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.